This is Leading the Way, presented to you by Nikolina Finska, podcast about challenges of being a woman entrepreneur and leader in a STEM startup scene. Hello and welcome. This is a new episode of Leading the Way, and today I will be talking about the co-founders. Interesting topic. Uh, I had multiple businesses. I had co-founders. I had some businesses that I ran solo, and I always try to be very honest. Uh, in this podcast, I talk very candidly about my experiences, and this will be no different today. Uh, but I have to say that I will not name names. So I'm really sorry if I'm disappointing someone who was expecting to see or hear some drama. There won't be any drama, or maybe a little bit without names. I have to keep you engaged, to stay until the end of the podcast. But yeah, I'm gonna share what I learned, how I feel about it, and at least some experiences that I have, and really to try to kind of give you an idea. What does it feel to work solo or have co-founders, and what to do in situations when the things don't work out. Um, First thing that I would like to talk about is, do you even need a co-founder? Now, I was entrepreneur mostly in the gaming industry, and here's pretty much standard to have co-founders. Just because of the nature of work is such that you need different disciplines to be able to make a product, that very often when you are starting a gaming studio, you would have, you know, three, four, five, even more founders. Usual number is between three and five. So when I decided that I want to become an entrepreneur, for me the first step was just to go and look for co-founders, because that was just what everybody else was doing. That seemed like the easiest way to do, the right way to do it, and to find this core team of people with whom you can make the game together. I will not name names, but I found my group of people. These are my ex colleagues, and I spoke with them, and we had some quite um, intense conversations. But unfortunately, the things didn't pan out because some of them had some personal obligations that didn't allow them to actually jump the ship and go to a startup. And then I took a job instead of starting the business, and like my entrepreneurial dream got postponed for another year. And today I'm wondering what would happen if he would start that startup. Because looking back, the team was pretty good. I still admire those people, and I think they're great. And you never know what could have happened if it took that route, but it didn't happen. So if they're listening, I appreciate you folks. Yeah. And it was a good idea at the time. But yeah, moving forward, when you start the first time in a business, you don't know what you don't know. And of course, this is what you see around you, that people who are starting businesses, they're starting with your colleagues. So you will choose somebody whom you worked with. Now, I have to say that, when you work in a corporate environment and when you work in a startup environment, are two very different things. You can have relationships, working relationships, that will function amazingly well in a corporate environment. But when you take them out of there and put them in a startup, they won't work, because it's just the setup is different. It's much more stressful. Everything is unsecure. There's no support system. If you are working in a big corporation, there is department for everything. They'll take care of legal and accounting. There's so many things that you don't even have to think about, because there's a department or somebody taking care of it. You can focus on your area of business. In startup, everything is your area of business. As a founder or co-founder, you have to learn quickly everything and take care of everything, at least until you manage to hire a team. But even early on, you will not be able to hire everybody for everything. You have to hire a core team to focus on the product. So your range of responsibilities is wider. Plus, on the top of that, there are much bigger constraints. There is limited time, there's limited money, there are limited resources, the stress is much higher, the expectations are higher, uh, and it can be very stressful, and it's not for everybody. So, as I said, I learned the hard way that somebody whom you get along at work, that relationship might not work really well when you go to the startup environment. So I realized, okay, I would need to look at the things a bit more differently if I want to go further as an entrepreneur. So how to get a co-founder? And yeah, I mean, before we go there, do you even need a co-founder? My experience, first experience wasn't great, but it never crossed my mind that I wouldn't need co-founder. It's just the nature of business is such that co-founders are really important and that the burden of creating a product by yourself and building a company by yourself, it's really, really heavy. Um, and for me, I think that it's not only about focusing on the product, it's also having somebody with whom you can run your ideas and kind of get input. I have 100 ideas per day, and having a business partner that with whom you can actually bounce these ideas back and forth, it gives you this clarity, it gives you the reality check. Because if you don't have someone like that, you just might go and try to do them, and then things what can happen is that you end up in a endless loop where you're constantly trying to implement some new idea that you have and nothing gets done, or you realize when you're already committed to it and start doing it that it's not going to work, and then what? So having a co-founder, it really helps in making decisions, having these different perspectives, and making business run smoother. With that said, I had businesses that I ran solo. Right now, I have a business that uh, run solo. So I have a gaming studio startup in US with the co-founders, which are great. Hi, if you're listening, hi. But I also have my own consulting company in Croatia that I run solo. Just the nature of business is such that I don't need a co-founder. Uh, if somebody would come along that would have very similar profile and want to do very similar things, maybe you could join forces, but there is no need to do that. So of course, it really depends on the nature of your business as well. I also know some very successful solo founders in the gaming industry. It's rare, but it happens. So it's something that can be done, and it really depends on what are your goals, what kind of company you're trying to build, what is your focus, what is your end goal, what's your style of working. I would always recommend to get a co-founder because you just whatever you're trying to build, it makes it easier. But if you're building a business like, I have consultancy and education. Right now, I'm perfectly fine just running this by myself as a solo founder. Let's put it that way. Uh, I don't have an intent of growing it to be new McKinsey. Not yet. I'm more focusing on building uh, the Rainbow Unicorn Game Studio with a team. So for me, there's no clear winner here. I prefer working with the co-founders, depending on the type of the business. I don't mind doing certain things solo, and that's something that you have to ask yourself as well. What do you expect from the co-founders? What will they bring on board? And understand why would you want to have a co-founder? Why you wouldn't want to have a co-founder? And as I said, in my industry, it's really common to have co-founders, but don't feel pressure that you have to have a co-founder because everybody else in the industry has them. Figure out what's the right approach for you. But yeah, so how to get a co-founder when we decided we want to have one. Uh, as I mentioned earlier, very often it's someone we know, and that's pretty common. And that's you would look at positively from investor side that you have a team that worked together before. But this comes with pluses and minuses as well. Working with people whom you worked before, it might work great in a corporate environment. it might not work that great in a startup environment. There is much higher level of fear and insecurity, and it doesn't gel well with everybody. So these relationships might not work that smooth when you are in a different business setup. But of course, it might be also very beneficial and everybody gets along and do things quicker because you aligned, you work together, you have this experience, you understand each other, can communicate better. But also for me, that might be a little bit of problem because you work together for so long, you would have almost like a one perspective. Let's put it, you kind of might be quite a homogeneous group with very similar ideas. And again, if you're doing something new, if you're trying to create something new when you're in startup environment, you might need to have different perspectives. Somebody who would come from outside and say, no, this doesn't make sense, or it could be done better like this. And then there is this richness of having somebody who is actually from outside, who is not from your inner circle, somebody whom you worked with before. Plus, it might be tough sometimes to convince people to go to a startup. I will have a separate episode where I talk about why there is no more women entrepreneur, especially in STEM or male dominated industries. But if you're a woman, and if you work all your life in a corporate environment, you know, come on, let's be realistic. We all know that we have to work much harder, prove ourselves much more to be able to get this promotion to this next step, to go higher up, to get recognition, to get achievement, to get a salary. And when you fight for so long, when you reach that level, it's much bigger risk to go to something which is completely untested and unsecured and didn't even have to raise money. Just the risk, the jump is much scarier. Plus, still today, women are mostly carers for their families. Even if they don't have children, they are more likely to be carers for the elderly in their family or relatives. So women would have these extra duties plus harder time climbing corporate ladder. And of course, it's a bigger risk for them to jump into the startup world, which is so unsafe, unsecure. I wouldn't say unsafe, but unsecure. And if you like, I was trying to find always um, co-founders that would be really aligned with me and have the same views, which are very important to me on the diversity, equity, and inclusion. And lots of lots of women and other folks I came across. It would be just too big risk to drop something they had to fight so hard to reach for something that was very unsecure, and I understand that. But on the other hand, if you can get a co-founder, but somebody who worked with you before, have experience working with, you get this perceived safety that it's somebody who with whom you can work together well and that you can resolve your conflicts and that you have similar way of working or similar way of looking at the business. Um, Another co-founders that we tend to look for are the ones who are very much like us. There are people in my circle, again, if you're listening, you probably know who you are, that we never work together, but we really like each other. We've been exposed to working teams and have some business things in common, but we actually never work together in a project. And, this person would seem to me like a perfect co-founder because we're so much alike, we're so much aligned. It would be amazing. We would agree on everything and build something great. Probably. And probably would also have very same perspective and be completely blinded about certain things because we just see things too much alike, which is a great plus, but can be a minus. I would always go to a business with a person like that, but it would be healthy than to have a third co-founder, somebody who would be a bit different and have a bit different perspective. That we just don't get overly excited about something that it's only one point of view. Uh, but but this is also kind of like I learned these things the hard way. And sometimes it works great. Sometimes you find an ex-colleague, you start a great business and works great. And there are lots of success stories like that. But there are lots of failure stories like this. And unfortunately, these ones are not talked enough because people don't particularly like to talk about the failure. So these are the stories that you don't hear. So I'm hoping to change this a little bit and share some of my failure stories or unsuccessful stories just to show how what can happen when the things go wrong. Because I think that it's important to talk about successes but also failures because we learn so much more from failures actually. But right, so now you decide to have a co-founder, and let's presume it's somebody whom you don't know. So somebody whom you used either executive agency or you went to some business event. There are even like how they call it, forums or places, networks, digital networks where you can actually look for co-founder, which is really great because you can describe what kind of person you want, and people there are actually available and want to be co-founders. Uh, but when you are looking for a co-founder, or even when you're looking for the C-level executive, particularly early on in your company, this is not a job interview. It is not the same as hiring somebody. That relationship between co-founders, it's much closer. It's much more intense because you will be facing really big challenges. You will be facing crisis. You will be facing lots of unknown. And in these moments, you are relying on your co founder to help you resolve this. So, this relationship is more bonding and it's more closer. You work much closer together and you spend much more time together. So, it has more, the stakes are higher than hiring somebody to work with you in the corporation. Because also, when you work in a corporation, well, there are people who are very valuable, uh, but at the end of the day, it's a machinery. There's so many people. So if somebody doesn't really function in a particular team, on particular role, that person can easily be moved to another department or even let go if it's such a case, and be replaced by somebody else. While in a very small business, especially very early on, it is really, really tough. When you have to separate ways with your co-founders early on, it is tough. It is really, really tough, and it can kind of jeopardize the whole company operations. So, how to prepare yourself for it? I mean, this is something I have not done when I was starting a business. I learned this hard way, but I did it something similar when I was before I was joining Rainbow Unicorn Games. So basically, I just wrote like, why am I doing this? Like, why do I want to be an entrepreneur? Why do I want to build specific type of gaming studios? And how I want to do it. So, what are the things that are really important to me? How businesses run, and what kind of product I would like to build? What kind of games I would like to work on? Or it wasn't only games. There's some other uh, products, digital products that I'm interested in creating, especially women health and things like that. Um, and this really helped me to clear my mind, and it really helped me to be like, right, this is who I am. This is what I'm looking for. This is what I would be. It wasn't even that I was looking for. It was more, this is what I'm open to. And there were certain things there that I've selected it, and it's non-negotiable for me. It doesn't matter how good is the offer if these conditions are not met. I will not join in. And even if I were looking for the job, it would be the same. So that list was beneficial in many ways. It helped me really put my thoughts on paper. It cleared out for me how I want to run a business and how I see business being run, and what I want to build. And helped me with putting it on paper, helped me recognize this in other people, or having a very constructive conversation about the topics that really matter to me. Um, so when you start this conversation about being potential co-founder with somebody, uh, it's more like a courting. When I joined Rainbow Unicorn Games, I was the last co-founder. We had multiple conversations. We had multiple conversations. We had multiple Zoom calls. We were talking about wide range of things, including social things, because the relationship is so close that you really need to describe in detail lots of things that you would not discuss with a regular employee, about your convictions, about uh, how you do troubleshooting, even about some of the personal things as well, because everything affects everything so early on when you're building a company. And it was particularly important because we all met online, so we didn't know each other from well, they didn't know me. I came from online, so we didn't know each other from real life. And it was really important to get this perspective of another person as much as you can, without actually seeing them in real life. And I remember when we had our first get together as a company, I was actually really nervous. I was like, oh, what if they don't like me? And then my partner was like, don't be crazy. You know, you're talking with these people for like a year now. Uh, this is not going to change anything if they see you. I'm like, all right, yeah, but it was a bit like that. It was a bit like, long distance dating, and then meeting your co-founders in person. But yeah, I think that step is really important, and I think that you should not rush finding a co-founder, even if you have an idea and that you're like itching to become an entrepreneur. There is no rush, because if you rush these relationships, it's not gonna help anybody, and you might set up yourself for disaster early on. Um, I think it's also important to have the very open discussions as well, not only to talk about superlatives and everything the best, but be also honest about your own limitations and the things that you don't want to do or don't like to do, because these things will come out sooner or later. And when you talk about them openly early on, before any work is even done, before even the company is founded or before you join in, um, it really allows for the better split of responsibilities. Um, Early on in startup, regardless of how big is your team, there will be co-founding team. There will be some overlap of responsibilities. It's just normal. Of course, as the company grows and becomes bigger, then this overlap becomes lesser, and the C-level executives, which might not be co-founders anymore, but very often are for quite some time, they tend to stand more in their lane, on the more professional lane, but they would not necessarily overlap much with the other departments. So this overlap would be minimum. But early on, there's lots of overlapping. There's a need to do a couple of things at the same time. There's also a need to back up for each other. So yeah, I think it's really important to discuss this strengths and weaknesses and the things that you like and dislike, and try to figure out a way how to make sure that everything is covered. One thing that I would warn potential founders, co-founders, in my experience, stay away from people who want to be co-founders, but they are not willing to go out of the comfort zone, or they're just willing to do one thing. Or the co-founders, which will ask you, will I have an executive assistant? I mean, we are not going to a business to have executive assistants. I think it's great to have them because they do a very valuable job later on. At the beginning, you book your own flights. It's not that hard. I can show you how. There are lots of videos showing you how. You do your own admin, and it's important for you to learn how to do it. You don't need executive assistant first day in your startup. This kind of things come later, because there's a bit of ego which comes with being entrepreneur and which comes with being a C-level executive. And we think about ego as a bad thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but ego, you need a little bit of ego, because you will be, regardless how uncomfortable you feel about public appearances and speaking publicly and presenting something, as a co-founder, as a C-level executive, it's part of the job. Even if you don't like it, even if you're not CEO, eventually you will have to do it. If not externally, at least internally, because you will have a team of people who will expect this from you. And you need to have a bit of ego to feel this drive to achieve something and to drive things and to lead people. Problem is with ego when it gets out of control, when it's unchecked. And that's something that be very careful when you're talking with your future co-founders, to see where are they in their ego and what do they expect from it, because people change. people change, and some people have very unusual expectations. I will tell you one small episode which happened in one of my companies, which I won't name, and I will not name the person, but it was highly positioned person in one of my companies who refused to carry their stuff, and they were literally using other people who were on a business trip to carry their stuff because they were too important. The person also insisted on having the top range computer that can be bought. Now, we are relatively early startup, and our funds are limited. We understand that you need to have good tools, but why do you need the most expensive laptop in the world? It was beyond me. And these are some of the things that, um, while they might give you confidence, that they might kind of come with the territory of being a C-level executive or being a co-founder, maybe that's not the first place where you want to spend your money and efforts. And I would warn you that stay away from the co-founders like that, because you will have issues if you are not like that yourself. If you are like that yourself and that's important for you, I don't judge. Everybody builds a company the way they want. It's great. It's fine. It's just not a company that I would personally like to build that way. I don't start from these things. I start from other things. But to each their own. This also comes again, like when you write down your values, what's important to you, what do you expect. These things, the small things can become bigger things, and it's important to list them and be honest to yourself. This is what I expect, and I would like my co-founders to have similar expectations or act in a similar way. So right. Um, so you found a great co-founder of co-founders, because as we know, there could be multiple. And what to do next? If you have a chance, I would say it's always a great thing to try to do something small together first, some small project. Um, for example, if it's early on, try to make company web page together. Even if none of you is a coder, try to design it together. Agree like how it should look like. Uh, Something small where you can test how your thinking process and collaboration will work. And that will be a great indicator how the things will work later on. Uh, I had an opportunity before we really start to work full speed ahead with Rainbow Unicorn Games to work as a consultant with my co-founder in Mobile Game Doctor, and it was a great experience working together in the same team, uh, because we learn how we operate, we learn like our skill levels, and it was great foundation to actually build on something together, also on our own gaming studio side, because we learned to work together and we realized that we actually get along and this relationship is working great. So it's a great experience to be able to do something like that. So this, it doesn't have to be anything big. It can be something that you just decide to do together. It's really like practical test of your relationship, and it might be great indicator, because sometimes people think their specific way, or they think they will be specific way, especially if they haven't worked in startup before. They think I will be like this, but when they start to work in a startup, they realize they're nothing like that, because working environment, it's something that it's hard to describe or hard to really imagine unless you're in it, and they might behave very different than they thought they will. So these small tests are kind of validation that what person thinks and what you think, it's really working out in practical terms. All right, so I think these are some of the things that would be super important about getting a co-founder, and that you will help you find the right match for yourself and for your company. But what if the things don't work out? This happened to me multiple times. Now, I had multiple startups. I think that altogether five, five. Yeah, I think I'm number five right now. Um, and I had problems. And I thought first time when I had a problem that I learned something, that it's not going to happen in the future, but it happened in the future as well, because there could be a range of issues with the co-founders. Again, I will not name names because That's not why we are here. And I wish all my co-founders, past and present, all the best. Um, but there were these differences in how we saw work and how we saw operating and how we saw the end goal, and how we saw priorities. Uh, there's it's really important between the co-founders to have trust, that you really can trust each other. And when that trust is gone, it's very difficult to bring it back, um, because the stakes are so high. And that can kind of then knock down the whole relationship and how the things work in the company. Another thing that's really important is support and compassion. I'm a big proponent of empathic leadership. And if you want to provide this for your employees, you should also provide it for your co founders and executives. So if there's no empathy among us and understanding, how can you model this for your teams and for the rest of the people in your company? I mean, you can't, because people look up to the leadership and to the co-founders, and how they behave. That's the model of the culture that it's gonna be then in the rest of the company, copied in the rest of the company. So I think that one thing that's really important, when you realize that you are kind of not aligned on certain things, to have an honest talk. Now, there are lots of people who don't have an honest talk because it's difficult, it's risky. Bringing out the problem and discussing it can cause drama, can cause people getting angry, people getting, you know, not happy with the situation. um, and it's a risk to bring it up. So you might think, okay, I will just pretend nothing is wrong and keep on working harder, and I will not think about this problem. But guess what? The problem won't go away. It's just going to grow bigger and bigger. And because you don't address it, your co founder doesn't even know there is a problem. They just keep on going the same path because they're not challenged about it. So it's not pleasant, but it's really important when you realize that there's some misalignment, to have an honest talk as early as possible. And two things might happen. You might resolve things and become even stronger and understand each other better and move forward much more aligned. Or you might realize that you have two big differences and that this relationship won't be working and that you want to go separate ways. Or third way might be that you realize that this relationship is not working, but the price is too high or the end goal is too close, and you will just suck it up and suffer through this relationship, which is now not great, until you reach your goal, until you reach your company goal. Um, I think this is, as hard as it sounds, it's better to do early than later, because the later you do it, the stakes are higher. Early on, the stakes are quite low. If you don't have a product yet, if you don't have a team, or you have a very small team, if you don't get much funding, if you're very early in the funding journey, getting separated from your co-founder, it's painful, but it's not as painful as doing it after working together for a couple of years. Also, when you talk about disagreement about something early on, there's generally not much bad blood. It's more like, hey, I noticed something. Are you okay if we discuss it? But if you wait for years, you have lots of resentment. And that discussion, it's very difficult to have a very constructive discussion with somebody if you feel that you've been putting up with something for years. Then this discussion doesn't go well. So I think and then it's partially on you as well because you didn't bring it up earlier. So I don't think you should wait until this is the last month. You can't put up with it anymore. But when you notice first challenges in the relationship, that some things don't really work out the way you think they should work out, because it is a bit easier. Um, there is also a bit of stigma and uncomfortable feeling when you go separate way with your co-founders. We also have to take in mind, if you have investors, you will have to explain this to investors, and that can be very unpleasant part of separation. I was in this situation myself that I had to explain to investors why somebody who was on a co-founder level is now not part of the company. And I was just honest, and they, they were not ecstatic about it, but they understood and accepted it. Because at the end of the day, it's better to have a functioning company, even with one person, uh, key person, not being there, than having a company that is not functioning at all. And also important to mention, sometimes we think that if we keep the conflict among ourselves, that's something that I thought, that if we keep the conflict among ourselves, because I didn't want to burden the employees, I didn't want to have employees taking sides, because I think that's very toxic. I want people to focus on work, and if we have something to resolve among ourselves as leaders, it should be resolve among ourselves, not involve other people, and not be like, I'm on this side, I'm on that side. We should focus on building a business, not on building fractions within the company. But I realize I'm wrong, because you can't hide it. When something is off with the leadership and with their within their relationships, employees will notice it. They'll know. I mean, they're working, but they're not stupid. They notice just the energy in the room. Even if you work remotely, energy in a digital room, that something is off, and that then undermines trust in the leadership. And then people kind of start to focus on gossiping and guessing what's going on, rather than focusing on the work. So I think that when the discord happens among the co-founders, it's important just to sit down, try to resolve it. And if it can't be resolved, then see, okay, what's next? What can we do with this? If you're going separate ways, put it on the table. How would it look like for everybody? Who wants to stay in a company? Who doesn't want to stay? Do you want to change your role? Because you have many options how to resolve it. There's also, it's not the end of the world. That's never pleasant. If somebody leaves the company as a co-founder, that's never really pleasant, and there will always be at least some bitterness, but there are ways to do it gracefully, and ways to do it in a way that it's fair to everybody, that it's realistic and that it's fair. And I think if it comes to that, that's what you need to strive for. Uh, to make it as fair as possible, to protect the company, whoever is staying in a company, and the employees and the jobs, to do it with the least possible damage. Um, and said it is a bit tough. You might lose some employees regardless, because some people just feel very connected to some co-founder, or they'll work together. They might leave. That's part of the business. That's just part of what can happen. And if the other option is worse, and if you see there's no common way, it is worth doing it. So these are some of my remarks about the co-founders and founders, and how to find them. And what to do, or how things could potentially go wrong. Um, at the end of the day, I would still always take a co-founder when I'm starting a new business, especially if it's something that where we're building a service or product or platform that is long-reaching, or which is ambitious. And that's another thing I really want to emphasize, that find the co-founders who have the same level of ambition as you do. I almost went into business with somebody whom I highly, highly respect and I love, and I would work with that person anytime, but our level of ambition is very different. And I knew along the way that there's going to be not a conflict, but we'll want different things for the company. And that becomes a very frustrating situation. So make sure that you check your level, honestly check your level of ambition, and find a co-founder who has the same one. And I also want to emphasize, don't be afraid of your ambition. This is why you are taking a risk. This is why you are going into business and doing some crazy stuff, because you have ambition to do something certain way, or to reach certain goal, to achieve something, whatever that is for you. So don't be afraid of your ambition. Be honest to yourself about what do you want? How do you see this company grow, this product, this service? How do you see serving your audience? And find a co-founder who shares the same level of ambition, because that might be one of the things that you might stumble on, even if everything else is amazing. All right. So this is all I had for this episode. I hope that you stayed till the end. I promised drama, a little bit of drama. I hope I delivered at least a little bit of drama. And from the next episode on, there will be a video version, I think, as well. So stay tuned and hopefully see you all in 2 weeks' time. Bye. Thank you for listening to Leading the Way. For transcripts and more information, visit nicolinawork.com. Looking forward to meeting you here every other Wednesday.